Okay, we are all set to go. All right, so as I mentioned already, today we're going to be talking about grad school etiquette, some basic grad school expectations, some of the things that you can expect to see in grad school, and also some of the things that are going to be expected of you. And then also we'll be talking about some issues with networking and suggestions for how to go about that. Okay. So this presentation is kind of split up into a few different sections. First, we'll talk about email etiquette and how to go about contacting professors. Next, we'll talk about conferences and how to approach networking at conferences. We'll speak about expectations of grad school. It won't really be so much of a comparison between undergrad and grad. We'll just tell you some of the expectations of grad school. And then go over a quick grad school timeline. So kind of summarize some of the main milestones that you're going to meet and cross on your way to your PhD. So email etiquette. This presentation starts off asking you to participate a little bit. So what are some of the things that you think you all ought to keep in mind when you're contacting a professor that you want to work with in grad school? You can answer this in the chat or just speak up. Make sure their names are correct. Absolutely, that would be a big no-no to get their names wrong. So make sure you're getting their names correct. Knowing what their research interests are, absolutely. So knowing what their research interests are and talking a little bit in the email specifically about why you're contacting them and the reason that you would be contacting this professor probably is because your research overlaps in some way. So definitely talking a little bit about that, what their research is and how it intersects with yours. Let's see, Miranda, the last thing that she says is not emailing too late. So yeah, definitely, you know, professors, I'm sure that you all know professors are super busy. And so if you're going to be contacting a professor, especially a professor you don't know, it's always good to make sure that you've given them plenty of time. They may not have space in their lab. Explain who you are, be polite and don't demand, absolutely. So give them a little bit of an explanation of who you are, definitely kind of a general explanation. And then as I've already mentioned, again, linking up your research interests with theirs. Have a short but good greeting, yeah. Have the email not be too long or too short. That's definitely a good tip. Professors, again, I'm sure you're aware, you all know, you've worked with professors, like concise, short reading. They don't like it when they have to read a bunch of unnecessary stuff. So keep these emails as short as you can to say what you need to say. Emily says, make sure you use the right salutation, so title. So use professor or doctor when you address them, definitely. Kim says, mentioning the professor's research focus and connect that to your own experience. Yep. And add in some new perspectives. Make sure to mention the work they have done and why you would be interested in it, absolutely. And make sure the professor is not retired and is still at the school. Absolutely, yeah, that's a that's a good one. Make sure that you have looked at the faculty page recently and make sure that the person who you're wanting to work with actually is not only hasn't retired, but also, especially if they're kind of a younger professor, you might want to make sure that they're even still in that position, because people, not only do they retire, but they also move from one university, one position to another. So yeah, make sure that you're the person that you're contacting is actually still in the position. Good, that's all really great. You all came up with a lot of really good ideas to keep in mind. So I've got a few here. Show your credentials and research experience, which you all have already mentioned in your introduction of yourself. Some of the things that you ought to talk about are your credentials. So where you go to university, what program you're in, what degree you're pursuing or you've already earned. And then definitely a quick discussion of your research experience as it relates to their research. Explain why you were contacting them at the beginning. So I think this is an important one. Don't have like a really long greeting and a very long introductory paragraph before you actually tell them why it is that you're contacting them. Again, professors are really busy, and so they're going to want to see close to the beginning, why is this person contacting me? Sorry, everyone, I don't know why these are appearing out of order like this. Be sure you have a professional email address. This is a really basic kind of a basic suggestion that I think you all are familiar with. I would use your university or UCSB email address, not some like, party girl 72 or whatever. Make sure you're using a professional academic email address in all of your communications. Make sure you have an informative subject line. So make sure that your subject line has a specific kind of summary of what this email is going to be about, again, so the professor knows why you're contacting them right off. And use appropriate salutations. Somebody has already mentioned that. Emily mentioned that in the chat. So make sure you're using Professor so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so. Besides making sure that you're saying professor or doctor so-and-so, also, these are the types of salutations you should use. When your email should just start off Professor Smith or Dear Professor Smith. Don't start these off hello, Professor Smith. So I would either just their name or dear in their name. Never hi or hello. Make sure that you've done your research on them and that you mention their work as it relates to your specific interests. You all are definitely solid on that. Be clear and concise. So again, not a lot of extra language. Don't waste these people's time. Try to get your point out as quickly as possible. Use formal language. Remember that you're speaking to a professor. Make sure that you ask to schedule a time to meet. And any one of these ways are fine. Certainly phone and Zoom right now, probably more than in person. And if you get a response back from a professor, this is a kind of a general rule as well, not just for when you're emailing professors that you want to work with, but anytime you get an email from a professor, you should respond quickly. I would not let an email from a professor sit in my inbox for more than 24 hours. If there's some reason that you can't respond quickly, you need to find some more information or something like that before you respond completely, I would at least send a response back, just letting them know, Dear Professor Smith, I thank you for your email. I need to find some more information and then I will respond to you at my earliest convenience. So again, if you can't send a full response, at least let them know that you're going to be getting back to them within 24 hours. Some things to avoid doing when you're emailing professors is sending a generic email. Sending emails that are really long and rambling. And sending an email in a rush without editing it. Make sure that you always proofread these emails, especially if it's the first time that you're contacting somebody who you want to work with. You don't want to send them an email that is full of errors. You want to make sure you're making a good first impression. So here's, this is an example of a bad email. Dear Professor Kelsky, I'm a student at UCSB and I'm thinking about graduate school on biology. I'm getting in touch to ask if you can give me any advice or direction about that. Sincerely, Student X. What's wrong with this email? Too vague? Yeah, Lisa's good on that one. It's too vague. Not stating who they are. Yeah, we don't have an explanation of who this person is or why they're contacting this professor. Yeah, thank you, Miranda. you don't know why you're reaching out to the specific professor. Yeah, if a professor gets an email like this, they're pretty much just instantly going to delete it. They might not even respond to you. We've already done this. So here's a better example. Dear Professor Kelsky, I'm a student at College X with a major in whatever. I'm a junior and I will be graduating next May. I have a 4.0 GPA and experience in our college's programs. I'm planning to attend graduate school in this field with a focus on X. In one of my classes, which was taught by Professor X, I had the chance to read your article. I really enjoyed it and it gave me many ideas for my future research. I'm exploring graduate programs where I can work on this topic. My specific project will likely focus on, and I'm particularly interested in exploring the question of X. I hope you don't mind my getting in touch, but I'd like to inquire whether you are currently accepting graduate students. If you are, would you be willing to talk to me a bit more by email or on the phone or in person if I can arrange a campus visit about my graduate school plans? I have explored your department's graduate school website in detail, and it seems like an excellent fit for me because of the emphasis on X. But I still have a few specific questions about these things that I'd like to talk to you about. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate any time that you can give me. Thank you very much. So this is a much better example of an email. It tells the professor specifically who you are. This person has been clearly identified. They say where they're at, what college they're at, what they're pursuing, what kind of programs they've been involved in. It includes this information about GPA, which is good because if you're going to be contacting a professor in order to see if you can work with them in graduate school, it's good to kind of drop your GPA, especially if it's a good one. That way they know that you're somebody who's actually a serious contender. It mentions specific research interests and how they relate to what this professor is doing. And then it gives some specific questions about what you'd actually like to talk about. Should we include our minors, double majors, if it doesn't pertain to the research that the professor does? No, you don't really need to. I mean, it wouldn't be a big problem if you did include your minors or your double major. But you don't need to. I would keep it, yeah, I would keep it more tailored to the reasons why you're contacting a specific professor. I will say a few things that, no, I'm not going to critique this. I was going to go through and critique it. It seems weird to put a GPA. Yeah, I think that, again, I could see why this example, why the GPA would be there, especially if you have a 4.0, because again, it's showing this professor that you are a real contender, like you're somebody who might actually get into the program and they might actually want to work with. I could see why you would think that it's weird though. It seems like you're just bragging. I don't know. I wouldn't read it that way. It does. I see why it could feel to you as somebody who's writing this that it feels like you're bragging, but I think that it's information that a professor would want to have. Should we also put our GRE score then? No, I wouldn't get into all of that information. That's probably too much, a GRE score. And again, this is just a sample. This is a sample that is taken from a book by this person, Karen Kelsky, who she's kind of like a professional writing teacher. You don't have to go specifically by this. I wouldn't use this as a form, kind of generic email. Why not just send your resume? Because they're probably not going to want to read your resume. A professor is probably going to want to spend less than a minute reading this. So I wouldn't send a bunch of your resume and your CV or anything like that. Remember, these are busy professors getting an email from some random person who they're not getting paid to work with. So don't take up a lot of their time.
I have a question.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm actually in the process of looking at professors that I want to work with in grad school, and I found a couple, and I spent a bit of my time reading their papers, right? And so I don't just want to say I read your papers, I actually wanted to demonstrate that I did read them. And I got a little engaged with their work. I said that, oh, this is like my experience that I had working with like B cells, for example. And then I started like asking them questions like what would happen if this happened to B cells. I feel like that's too specific, but I wasn't sure. It's like my first time ever writing a draft email for a professor. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't ask professors specific questions about their research in an email. I would ask, can we meet so that we can discuss these topics? A professor isn't going to want to have to like write you like a paper back explaining their research or responding to your question about their research. It's something that I think they would prefer to talk about. And so you might say that you are, again, I'd like to speak to you because I have questions about B cells, I think is what you said, but I wouldn't put the specific question in here and expect an answer back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And as a follow-up, how can you like demonstrate that you actually care about their research without saying like, I thought your papers were cool?
Yeah, that was actually a part of when I said that I was going to start critiquing it. That was actually part of this email that I don't like. I read your research and I really enjoyed it, and it gave me many ideas for my future research, which is kind of just like, oh, I read your research and I think it's cool. The way that you show that you really care about the research is by, again, showing that you are familiar with it enough to know and to be able to say how it intersects with your own research. You show that you care about it not by complimenting them or being like, oh, your research is so brilliant. You show that you care about their research by showing that you understand it well enough to see how it can be applied to what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a bit more sense. It is a bit hard though to try to like piece things out, but that's definitely a good lead that you gave me. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've already identified a professor, if you've looked at their research and you've identified them and you're interested enough to be reaching out, then I suspect that you already know what that connection is on some level. You just need to articulate it. Are there other questions? Okay. So why was that email better? I think that we've already, is there anything else anyone wants to say about why that one was better? I think we've done most of that. Oh, it shows your qualifications, shows what you've done, that you've done your research, that you're familiar with their work, you respect their time. One other thing is that you can definitely also ask people to look at these emails, especially if it's your first time reaching out to professors who you don't know. Get a grad student or me or somebody to look at the email for you your first couple of times, and just have somebody else kind of go through and correct it for you. And then once you've kind of got the hang of it, then you don't need people to look over your emails anymore. But it's usually helpful to have someone look over them the first couple of times. Any other questions about emails and email etiquette? Okay, so conferences and networking. So academic conferences are more than simply events where you present your research. They're places for you to engage in current debates and debates on topics in your field. They provide spaces for you to build relationships with other scholars. This is really one of the most important things that can happen at a conference. Again, it's not, when you're at conferences, you're usually hearing the most sort of cutting edge research because it's stuff that people oftentimes haven't published yet. It's the stuff that they're just kind of working on. So you're hearing oftentimes the newest research, but also one of the most important and valuable things that you can do at a conference is to make these relationships with other people. I made this slide that is kind of like a hierarchy of conferences. And so there's lots of different, there's at least 3 different types of conferences. And they kind of have different levels of importance or clout, I guess you could say. And so some conferences, usually depending on your field, there will be kind of one or a couple of national professional organizations that puts on a conference once a year usually. So I'm in religious studies, and for me, it's the American Academy of Religion. Find out what the main national professional organization is in your field. Their national conference is kind of the gold standard for where you should try to present your research. The next best would be the regional meetings of that same national organization. And so the American Academy of Religion each year has one national meeting, and everybody's invited to it. Then they also have several regional meetings. So they have a regional meeting from like the Southwest and the Northwest and Central United States. And so those are also nice, but they're not quite as, they don't have quite as much clout as the national conference. And then sort of the lowest type of conference would be conferences that are hosted by university departments and oftentimes hosted by grad students. Those are still great places to present your research, but when it shows up on your CV, it's not as impressive as if you've presented at the national conference. Are there questions about these different types of conferences? So ways to find a conference to present at, one of the most basic ways would be to ask faculty and students about conferences. Research prominent organizations and associations in your field. Join your professional association at the student rate. McNair will support that. Usually when you join, like when I think when I joined the American Academy of Religion, I think it's like $75 a year or something. So you do have to pay to be a part of it. See if notable schools or departments have conference opportunities. So that's kind of going to that third type of conference that I mentioned before, conferences that are hosted by universities or grad students. Within that, then I guess you could also see a hierarchy where like Harvard or Stanford would maybe be more impressive than some other universities where you might present. And then you can also subscribe to email listservs that send out calls for papers. Are there questions about these things? Okay, what to do before a conference. This is, again, all focused on networking. So before a conference, one second, SACNA's conference still has registration scholarships if you're interested. Thank you, Emily. Thanks for announcing that. So before a conference, if you're able to find out what scholars are going to be there, if there's a program or something like that, and there's scholars whose work you're interested in, try to email them. Try to set up an appointment with them. This was probably pretty obvious, but review the schedule and plan to attend panels that are relevant to your research. What to do during the conference. Introduce yourself to other scholars in your field. An email introduction after you've seen their presentation would be great. Yeah, so this is good, especially since we have smartphones now. So you can actually just sit there and watch someone's presentation and then email and introduce yourself like right afterwards. Attend as many panels and receptions as you can manage. Business cards. Yeah, business cards are good. If you have them. Collect contact information for those individuals you meet, or look up individuals from the program and their university directories. So I know for me, this is oftentimes the most difficult part because I have social anxiety. I don't like going to a conference and sort of meeting a lot of people. It's tough work for me. Yeah, Emily's agreeing with me. While I'm there, I oftentimes have to sort of put on like a professional facade and kind of have a character. That helps me to be a little more social. At least they have food. Yeah, right, Emily? What should be included in a follow-up email after a presentation or conference, especially if they responded to a question that you posed during their presentation? So again, I would just introduce myself kind of in the same manner that you, I mean, not as thoroughly as we saw in the email to the professor where it had kind of lots of details about yourself, but I would introduce myself in general. Hi, my name is Chris. I'm a PhD student in religious studies at UCSB, and I was in your presentation on whatever. I thought that you had really great ideas about whatever, and I'd like to discuss this more. Would you have time to meet briefly? Maybe we could grab a bite or coffee, or we could just talk between sessions. So propose as well what kind of a time to meet if you can. Does that help, Rosalind?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. I'm also was curious about a lot of them are still virtual.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they probably will be still virtual conferences happening like in the upcoming school year. So like you can't really meet with them, like one-on-one, face-to-face. So, but everything else that you said, totally, that's exactly what I was wondering about, like how to differentiate between the emails that you spoke about in the earlier part and, they're not our professor. So, but you totally did it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. When I'm thinking about this, I keep putting myself back into like actually being at a conference and what I would do if I was actually at a conference. And you're quite right. Like we're virtual now.
Yeah.
So being virtual, I would still sort of do the same type of thing where you would maybe, if you have their email address, again, contact them and just ask, instead of can we have coffee, maybe we can, after the virtual conference is over, could we maybe meet on Zoom and talk?
Okay. That sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions here? Virtual conferences, if you turn your video on, people can be more sociable with you. Absolutely, Lisa. I cannot agree more. At virtual conferences, classes, I think it's always best to have your cameras on. And have a contact photo as your icon. Yep. That's okay that you all have your videos off right now because we're watching a PowerPoint presentation, so no hard feelings. Yeah, what is a contact photo?
I know like in Zoom, you can like essentially instead of just having my name up right now, you could put like a professional photo that maybe is also on your LinkedIn too.
Got it.
Or you can put a Bitmoji. I've seen people put Bitmojis. Maybe don't do that during a conference though.
Yeah, I think during a conference, it's, especially if it was somebody who I was wanting to make a good impression on and to speak with later, I would definitely want to have my camera on personally, because I would want to make a good impression on that person and show them that I'm really interested in what they're saying. And having my camera off is kind of a way of maybe saying I'm not so interested in what you're saying. If I've got my camera on and I'm looking at you, I'm sort of, in a way, participating more and kind of respecting you more, I think. Are there any more questions or comments? So So after a conference, make sure that you email faculty that you've met with and thank them for their time. Again, this is probably more for an in-person conference. Email your panel participants. So if you were presenting at the conference, email the other people who you were presenting with. Usually at a conference, some conferences will have just sort of a series where people present by themselves, one after another. Oftentimes though, there will be 3 or 4 people presenting at the same time on a shared topic. I'm sure you're familiar with this. So it can be a nice touch to email the other people who you presented with and also the moderator, especially since they're people who are probably interested in topics related to your research. Email anybody who you think you might want to collaborate with in the future, including organizing panels at future conferences. What do you say to thank them? Just thank you for being on the panel with me. That sounds awkward. Yeah, so I would say probably it was really great. Again, I'm gonna just kind of give you a sketch of what I would say in an informal way. I would say something like, it was great meeting you and learning about your research. I think that we had a really great conversation around certain topics that may have come up during the question and answer session. I hope that maybe at some point in the future we can collaborate or we can compare results on whatever. Does that help a little bit? I probably wouldn't email people just to say thank you for being there, but I would email people specifically if I was hoping that in the future we might be able to work together in some way. So some of the things that you'll get out of networking at conferences, if you can overcome your social anxiety, is meeting students and faculty that will be your future colleagues. You can definitely get lots of great opportunities out of this, not only future panel presentations, but definitely publications, jobs, and funding can also come out of this. Letters of recommendation might come out of this type of networking if you then develop some sort of a relationship with the person who you met at the conference. If you just meet someone at a conference once, I wouldn't contact them again like a year later and ask them for a letter of recommendation. But if you've developed a relationship with them after a conference, that can definitely happen. Are there any other questions about networking at conferences? Emily mentioned that she's found mentors this way. Yeah, I know lots of students actually who have undergrads who are in the McNair program who have found mentors and even letters of recommendations from people they've met at conferences. And I think that we might, I mean, I don't know what's going on in every field, but I'm crossing my fingers. I think that we actually are starting to go back to real life conferences coming up. I know that the American Academy of Religion is planning to hold their national meeting coming up in September. Okay, so undergrad versus graduate school. Let's talk about some of the differences here. So the first difference between undergrad and grad school, in undergrad, you obtain new knowledge. So you're mostly learning. You learn about general education and introductory classes. So you're not just learning in your field, but you're getting kind of a broad education. You oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes take large lecture-based classes. In grad school, you're going to obtain much more specialized knowledge, and it's not exclusively a process of learning, but now you're actually going to start to contribute and create new knowledge. So it's not just about taking knowledge in anymore. Now it's about you producing knowledge. You're going to specialize again in a particular area. And most of your classes, probably all of your classes actually, will be small discussion-based seminars of less than 10 or 20 people. Generally not lectures where you go in and sit and listen to somebody else, the professor, talk to you, but again, discussion-based seminars where professors might not say much at all. It's the students who are expected to lead it. Are there questions about these distinctions? A note about assignments. So in undergrad, you tend to get a lot of assignments, midterms, finals, quizzes, and papers, homework assignments, and reading responses, and things like that. Grad school, your assignments are much fewer and generally longer. In a seminar, I oftentimes, in many of the seminars I've taken, there's no assignments, you just write one paper at the end of it. So you have to kind of keep up with the work and then produce something at the end. You'll write a thesis perhaps, oral and written exams, and dissertation chapters. So these are the types of things that you're working on. Much longer, much fewer, much more involved. And again, I think it's worth reiterating, it's not testing so much like an undergrad. This is what I've learned. Down here in grad school, it's more of this is what I've produced. Interpersonal relationships change quite a bit when you go to grad school. So in undergrad, you may get a lot of hand-holding, reminders from professors. Generally, you're treated as a student. In grad school, you do things on your own, you're expected to be independent, and you're treated as a colleague or a professional. So this is definitely a big difference. For example, with my dissertation that I'm writing currently, my advisor doesn't ever contact me about anything. I work on my own schedule and I send it to him. I send work to him whenever I'm ready to send it to him, but he's not ever emailing me asking me like, hey, Chris, where's that chapter? He'll look at it when I send it to him, but I don't have anybody keeping me on a schedule. You have to kind of do that on your own. I'm going to skip this participation part because I think this presentation was made for when we had longer sessions. Are there any questions about those differences between undergrad and grad? Or any other questions that you might have that were not touched on there?
I guess for me, my question would be, how was your transition with undergrad to grad school? And I felt like in the COVID pandemic, I feel like that definitely gave me an advantage because, you know, I had to work on my own. I had to like watch lectures independently and do a lot of things as like you mentioned a grad school student would. But how did you have any challenges that you faced when transitioning?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of my challenges when I transitioned actually were more social because I went into a master's program before I came to UCSB, and I went to Harvard for my master's program, and I had graduated from Cal State Long Beach. And so for me, I think more than anything was this culture shock of going from Cal State Long Beach to Harvard. That's one thing that you might definitely face as a culture shock depending on where you're going.
Or I guess the follow-up question would be like, was it easy to ask for help? Like, are people welcoming? Do they want to help you like transition and, you know, feel comfortable in the graduate student environment?
Yeah, again, that's a tough question. I think that there's going to be different experiences for people in different fields. I think that probably some fields are more supportive. And from what I hear, I'm not in one of these fields, but from what I hear, some fields are oftentimes not as supportive. One good thing about most departments is that when you come in as a PhD or when you come into grad school, you come in with a cohort of other students who are your same year. They're coming in together. There's maybe like 20 of you who come in together. And it's really good to try to cultivate a relationship and have a strong cohort of like the people who we all came in together, and try to be friends and try to stay together throughout the whole program. Was that helpful, I hope?
Yeah, it does help. And I know like it all depends like where you go to school, and everyone's situation is different. But yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely did help. Thank you.
Would you be able to send me your slides from today? Rosalind is asking. Yes. Are you happy during qualification exams? Oh my gosh, we'll get to qualifying exams next, but are you happy during them? That's definitely not a great question to ask. Not the right question to ask. You're very productive during them, maybe not happy. Do you eat as much ramen as you do during undergrad? I never ate ramen. I don't like ramen, but you definitely are not going to be eating a lot of fine foods, I imagine. Can you tell us about the culture differences you noticed between California and Harvard that contributed to the culture shock? Yeah, so I think that people were a lot more competitive at Harvard. It was, oftentimes I did not feel like my other graduate students, the other grad students that were there with me in my cohort even, were kind of like on a team with me, so much as we were all competing for a space in the PhD program with each other. So that was a little bit harsh. There definitely were racial, I'd never faced racism or anything, but I went from some place that was very multiracial to some place that was much less multiracial, some place that had, again, I was low income, and now I was at a place where there was a lot of people who were very not low income. Yeah, am I fleshing that out enough? All right, do I have a hand raised?
Yes, it's mine.
Oh,
Hi. So I started to type it, and then I just thought I might as well just ask. It'd probably be easier. So I have a concern, well, I have a few concerns about graduate level work. And so they all sort of fall around studying. And it's really, one is that I'm really concerned about being able to keep up with the readings that I would have to do. You mentioned in one of the slides about like longer assignments, or like, like thesis and all of these different things. And I guess just trying to keep up with the reading that the professor would have, as well as like research, and like how do I get all that in and really produce something. And then also like how to stay organized, and like with planning, and like how to do my studying, especially with like coming out of pandemic way of being back into like face to face. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out like how do I set up for something that I'm not exactly sure of what that looks like. Like, do I study the same? Do I have to switch things up? I don't know if all that's making any sense, but it all falls around studying, reading, being able to produce, and how to keep organized and planning. Yeah. Okay. If
yeah.
you can find the question and all that.
I mean, those are really important. Those are, I think, the $1 million questions, right? Like, how do I do this? How am I going to manage all of this? One thing to remember is that the bulk of like when you're really producing the bulk of your knowledge, this when you're switching over into that production mode, there's kind of going to be in your graduate career kind of two phases. So the first phase before you've taken your qualifying exams, when you still are kind of studying and learning a little bit. And so that's when you're really going to be doing most of your reading and studying, is before your qualifying exams. Then after your qualifying exams is kind of when you switch over to mostly exclusively doing research and not really taking classes any longer. Ever since I passed my qualifying exams, I haven't taken a single class. And I just work on my dissertation now. So there is kind of, it's broken up a little bit. So there's that. How to stay organized is a really tough question. And I think that everybody probably has different ways of going about it. For me, the thing that has helped me is to try to, as much as possible, treat my academic work like a job. And so remember that I need to probably put in, I mean, I try not to overwork myself, but I probably need to put in maybe 30 to 40 hours a week on my research, on my graduate work. And so I have a desk at home, just like I have a desk at school and a computer, and I sit at my desk for certain hours every day. Just like I have a schedule at work when I work, like maybe I work from 10 to 1 p.m. every day, and I go to the office and I'm just there. I do the same thing at home. I work from 10 to 2 p.m. every day. I go to my desk, I have my cup of coffee, and I stay at my desk during those times, and I just do my work. Maybe I'm not always completely focused, but I'm at my desk.
Okay.
That works for me, trying to keep regular hours and trying to treat it like a job.
Totally makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there other questions or comments? Okay. So the timeline, this is where we're going to talk a little bit about those qualifying exams. So your grad school journey is going to sort of be broken up into a few different phases. The first phase, or the first section, is going to be years 1 to 2 or 3, depending on your program. And during the first couple of years, during these years, you still are going to be doing coursework. This is when you're going to be taking those small seminars and pro seminars. A seminar is just kind of any class. That's what grad students take. We don't take lectures, we take seminars. So it can be on any number of topics. A pro seminar, this is kind of a series. Most fields have a series of seminars. And when your cohort comes in, the cohort all takes these seminars, the pro seminars together. And so in religious studies, we had 4 pro seminars. It was like the intro to religious studies, A, B, C, and D. And the cohort that I came in with, we all took those seminars together. Each quarter, we took a different one. And what happens in a pro seminar is that it kind of is teaching you the basics of the field. This is what anybody in our field needs to know. And then the small seminars are more specialized around topics or professors' research interests. Milestones that you might face during these first couple of years would be a first year exam, or if you are required to have a master's degree before you go on to your PhD and you have like a joint master's PhD program, you might also have to do a master's exam or a master's thesis at this point. The type of funding that you would be trying to get at during this point are called pre-doctoral fellowships. So those are the types of fellowships that you would be applying for. And then during this period, you could also potentially be a teaching assistant or a research assistant. These would be kind of common jobs. The next section would be, the next period would be years 3 to 4. This is when you form your dissertation or your exam committee. Usually they're the same thing. So you start out with your exam committee, where you would have maybe 3 or 4 professors who you work with. They are your qualifying examination committee. Qualifying exams are exams that I'm pretty sure in every field we have to take these. So usually around year 3 or 4, there's going to be the way that it works for me, and it's different in different fields. But I had to find 4 professors. Each one of the professors worked on a main topic in my research, or a main kind of specialty that I do in my research. Each one of those professors then was going to give me an exam on one of these specialties. I had to read 75 to 80 books for each one of my 4 exams. So I had about a year or a year and a half to prepare for my exams. And then I went in, and over the course of 3 days, I spent pretty much 8 hours a day in a room with a computer, with no internet, just responding to, I had 4 exam questions, and I had like 6 to 8 hours for each one. Do you have caffeine and food? Yeah, I had lots of caffeine and lots of food. After I submitted the 4 essays that I wrote, my professors, the committee looked at my answers, and then about maybe 2 weeks later, I had a defense. And so I had to go in, and my 4 professors were there, and I sat across the table from them, and they kind of tore apart my answers, and I had to explain to them. So you're probably going to face some sort of version of that, where you have this exam committee. They're going to give you some number of exams. You'll probably have a good amount of time to prepare for them. You'll take your exams. You may have to do a defense, an oral defense as well. Once you've done that, the next stage after you've passed your qualifying exams, so ripping it apart does not mean you failed. Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, to put it out there, very few people fail their qualifying exams. By the time you're ready to take your qualifying exams, you're probably prepared to take them. So certainly it's probably going to stress you out, and it's going to be a ton of work. But remember, everybody passes these. The way that it worked for me, my professors didn't give me questions to throw me off. They knew the kind of stuff that I studied. They knew what I had been reading. They gave me these really like right down the line questions where it was easy for me to write for 8 hours. They gave me a big, broad question that gave me all kinds of time to just go on and write for pages and pages and pages. Your exam committee wants you to pass. They want you to pass. They know what you're doing. They're going to try to help you do it. After you pass your exams, you're going to write a dissertation proposal. And again, probably, I'm not sure that it goes like this in every field, but this is probably what's going to happen in the order. You write a dissertation proposal, or a prospectus, it might be called, which explains what you're going to be doing in your dissertation and how you're going to do it. And then again, you'll probably have to do an oral defense of the dissertation proposal, where your committee again will question you about why you've decided to do this and why you've decided to do it the way that you've proposed. After you've passed both of these, after you've passed your qualifying exams and you've submitted your prospectus, then you're advanced to candidacy, or ABD, which stands for all but dissertation. That means that you're kind of at the end of your graduate career. During this stage, you should be applying for dissertation fellowships, which will give you money so that you can write your dissertation. And you'll still be working as a teaching assistant or a research assistant probably. Once you've advanced to candidacy, you are basically doing your own research and writing your dissertation. So collecting any data that you still need to collect, writing and revising your dissertation. Usually you revise your dissertation in consultation with your main advisor. So your dissertation committee will have 3 or 4 people on it, but one of them usually will be your main advisor. And you usually write and revise in consultation with the main advisor. And then after the main advisor has approved things, then you'll show your work to the rest of your committee, generally. That's a place, ABD, that I hear some people stay forever. Why is that? Yeah, people can kind of get stuck in ABD because at this point, you're really on your own. Once you're ABD, you're not taking classes anymore. You're not like on anyone's schedule anymore. Now you're just kind of turned loose to get your project done and to write your dissertation. And so both of those can take people a long time, getting their project done, and then also the writing of the dissertation. Try not to get stuck here. Be diligent about moving through your program quickly. Remember, your dissertation doesn't have to be perfect. Don't aim for perfection. You'll probably forget that by the time you get there in 5 or 6 years. You don't have to aim for perfection here. As far as funding goes, now you'll still be able to work as a research assistant, as assistant for professors. But now instead of a teaching assistant, once you're ABD, you can become a teaching associate. And so you can start to teach your own classes generally. Once you're ABD, you're no longer just leading discussion sections, you can lead your own courses. Do you want to be published though? Yeah, so all along the way, you should be all along this whole process, you should be looking for opportunities to present your research at conferences, and you should also be looking for opportunities to publish. Yeah, Rosalind, that's a good, try to remember in 5 years, you don't need to get perfection when you're writing your dissertation. It doesn't need to be perfect. Is the dissertation different from the materials you publish? That's going to depend on your field. It's 2 o'clock, so if folks want to go, you can go ahead and go. I'm going to stay here and answer any other lingering questions, but if you have to go, you can go. The dissertation is probably, depending on your fields, different from publications. Let me pull that back. It depends on your field entirely. If your dissertation is going to end up probably becoming a book, like it would in the humanities or maybe the social sciences, then you're probably not going to want to publish that material beforehand as freestanding articles, because then people aren't going to get the book, and maybe nobody's going to want to publish the book if everything's already been published in journals. If this happens, I think, more in STEM, where you actually do publish articles that then become your dissertation. So I think that is a good way to think about it. Is this going to turn into a book or not? Are there other questions? Okay, if there's no other questions, then folks can, again, you can go ahead and take off.